Good morning. My name is Kelly McCormick, and I'm the Director of Events and Programming with the Portland Regional Chamber of Commerce. Welcome to Growth Basics for Business, a monthly breakfast seminar series that provides a forum to gain useful, do-it-yourself workplace solutions and insightful, actionable tips. Today is our sixth event in the 2025-26 event series, and I want to thank you all for joining us this morning. I'd like to say a special thank you to our Growth Basics for Business sponsor, Combined, a Chubb benefits company, to whom we are grateful for providing relevant content and support for this series. Our topic today is human-centered skills for the AI-enabled workforce, and it will be presented by Leo Waterston of Waterston Coaching and Consulting. Like all of the Chamber's virtual signature events, today's presentation is free and is being recorded. It will be made available for free replay on the Chamber's website and YouTube page. To keep up to date on all the Chamber's news and events, please visit our website, portlandregion.com, or follow us on social media on Facebook, LinkedIn, or Instagram. We also have a newsletter that you can sign up for at our website while you're there. Before we begin today's program, I just want to remind everyone that we're using a platform called StreamYard, and this platform provides improved production and interactive elements that enhance virtual events. If you have any questions for Leo, our presenter today, you can type them in the YouTube chat throughout the presentation. Leo will answer them when appropriate, and we've reserved time at the end for Q&A. All this to say, please do interact with us this morning and ask any questions you have via YouTube. With that, I will hand things over to Leo for today's presentation.
Thanks so much, Kelly, and thanks for having me. I'm really excited to be with you all today. Thanks for making the time on a busy Tuesday morning. So I'm Leo Waterston. I'm an executive and career coach. I have my own coaching consulting practice, as Kelly mentioned, based here in South Portland. And I work with individual and organizational clients in Maine and throughout the United States. So this topic of human-centered skills comes up a lot in my coaching work, and I'm really excited to talk to you about it today. So the agenda for today's discussion, we're going to talk about so-called soft skills, which I'm reframing today as human-centered skills, and defining those. How these skills can help you grow in your career and their impact on teams and organizations. Talk a little bit more specifically about human-centered leadership skills and what that looks like in today's workforce. We'll talk more about the importance of emotional intelligence because it is so important on career growth and advancement and its impact on teams. We'll get into human-AI interaction and how these human skills interact with and intersect with technical skills. And then I'll end on some future trends and key takeaways. So as Kelly said, we really want this to be interactive, so please jump in with questions anytime. And with that, I want to start off with a question to you all. What comes to mind when you hear the term soft skills? And I'd love to have you put your answers in the chat, please, to start us off. So as you're thinking about that and putting answers in the chat, I, again, like to reframe soft skills for today's talk as human-centered skills. And some of these that you'll see on the screen here are from various reports and sources that are out there and data that looks at the workforce and skills in today's workforce. But some of these skills include interpersonal communication, adaptability and flexibility, emotional intelligence or EQ, conflict mitigation and conflict resolution, innovative thinking and problem solving, curiosity and critical thinking, as well as collaboration, stakeholder management, negotiation, persuasion and influencing skills, active listening, empathy, and resilience. So LinkedIn did a report last year in 2025, Skills on the Rise. They identified the 15 fastest growing skills in the United States. You can see that list here. and no surprise, AI literacy was at the top of the list. But I wanted to highlight the non-technical, what I would call, again, for today's talk, human-centered skills that are on that list. And you see they're significant. They're a significant proportion of the list. And they include conflict mitigation, adaptability, innovative thinking, public speaking, customer engagement and support, and stakeholder management. And the other stat that I wanted to pull out of this report, because I think it's so striking and it's very relevant to what we're going to be talking about today, is that 70% of the skills used in most jobs will change by 2030, according to LinkedIn data. So why are these human-centered skills so important in the AI era? One, and we'll talk about this more, human AI interaction. As these AI tools proliferate, as we use them more and more in our work, the workforce really needs professionals at all levels who can apply some foundational skills like critical thinking to determine how to use these AI tools responsibly, efficiently, and effectively. Also, teams are operating now across varied environments, remote, hybrid, in-person. As you all know, those environments are rapidly changing between the remote work change during the pandemic and now more of a hybrid, or in some cases in-person return to work environment. So in those dynamic environments, effective communication and interpersonal skills are really essential for success in the workforce today. Also, things like communicating your impact. Strong communication, presentation skills, and related skill sets are always going to enable technical professionals, even those using these advanced AI tools, to convey findings more effectively to their stakeholders. That always is going to enhance understanding and support. And then collaboration and innovation, a huge part of today's work in the knowledge economy. These skills that you saw highlighted, for example, in the LinkedIn report, can really take a project or an initiative from good to great. So these skills start to become your competitive advantage if you learn how to develop them and deploy them strategically throughout your career, or if you're building a team or leading a team in an organization, thinking about how to upskill your team appropriately. It can, as we see in the market data today, in the really challenging and dynamic labor market, employers are increasingly valuing skills like judgment, empathy, and communication over routine technical tasks that now we can hand over to AI tools. Professionals who are able to combine these areas of kind of domain expertise or technical skills with these human skills really are going to rise to leadership roles more quickly and be more effective leaders. And these skills really can help you build trust with your teams, your clients, and other stakeholders. Great leadership is always in demand, and that includes integrity, clarity, and a genuine human connection. And we'll talk more about what that looks like as we go on. So I wanted to highlight a couple of these skills in particular for today's conversation. And one is a communication skill that is all about how you kind of pitch yourself or describe yourself as a professional. And it's the tell me about yourself statement. So some of you may be familiar with this kind of description, but this is, the question that you get asked across many different settings as a professional in your work life, whether it's a networking event or a job interview, or just making introductions more informally within your organization, for example, or if you're at a conference. So tell me about yourself. So you get that question all the time. How do you answer that in a way that is clear, concise, and compelling? And so this is a skill that I actually work a lot on with clients, particularly those who are, navigating career transitions, for example, joining a new organization and onboarding, or those folks who are on the job market right now and going through a lot of job interviews. So there's a simple structure you can use to have an effective tell me about yourself statement. Starting with, who you are, you're really trying to describe your focus as a professional, your field, what you do well, and highlighting key strengths and or accomplishments. And that's really critical as part of your own sort of value proposition as a professional. And then what you're seeking, again, depending on the context and the situation and the person in front of you, That could be, again, if it's a job interview, what you're seeking for that role or your next step in your career, or if it's a general networking event or, a webinar like this, describing your professional interests. Why are you here? Why is this topic of interest to you? So bringing it home to sort of why you're there. Why does this matter? This tell me about yourself answer. It shapes really how others see you as a professional and your professional brand or identity. It helps create clarity and confidence when you're introducing yourself in these varied situations to varied audiences. And it helps open up conversations and opportunities for you as a professional. Another reason this matters is because of the importance of networking and how this type of communication and this way of describing yourself succinctly and compellingly matters so much for things like networking. Networking is the number one job strategy. I work with folks who are on the job market right now. And as you can see from the stat on this slide, 70% of the time, the person who is hired is someone with an internal advocate or an internal referral. And the workforce data and the LinkedIn data back that up over and over again, especially in this job market, which is so challenging right now for so many people. Having a connection at a company, having an internal referral, an internal advocate makes an incredible difference in your prospects of landing a job. But not only when you're a job candidate actively seeking a new role, when you're a working professional, networking is one of the best things you can do to grow and advance in your career over time and over the long term. Some of the data also shows us that professionals who are well networked, who have broad and deep networks, so they have meaningful relationships with the folks in their network, they tend to perform better across the course of their career than those who have smaller, less deep connections. So networking matters more than ever in the age of AI, that human connection. And the tell me about yourself statement and other communication skills really play into that very strongly. I wanted to also highlight another skill as it relates to stakeholder management. As you saw, that's one of the skills highlighted in the LinkedIn report. And again, so much of this comes down to communication. So in stakeholder management, whether you're working on an internal project or program, or you're working across organizations, for example, or in a coalition or a multi-sector initiative, so much comes down to clear communication and handling potential conflict, misunderstandings, and so forth across different modes of communication. So there is a framework out there called BIF, which was developed by Bill Eddy, who's a therapist and an attorney, so a uniquely qualified person to develop a framework like this. It's specifically designed to respond to high conflict communication in a variety of realms. It can apply in your personal life as well as your professional life. And BIF stands for brief, informative, friendly, and firm. So what does that mean in practice? When you're sort of crafting a BIF response, let's say you get email from a stakeholder at work, for example, about a project that is a high conflict communication. We've all been there, right? We've all had conflict arise in our work lives. So this is a framework you can utilize to kind of craft a response, for example, in that scenario. So brief, keep the response short, get your main point across while leaving less for the other person to react to. So you avoid getting into the weeds of the back and forth around content. Informative, you're giving facts and information and not emotions or opinions or arguments. You're sticking to just the clear information. Friendly, and that can be challenging, obviously, in these types of scenarios, a high conflict conversation or interaction, but it can be very simple as a friendly greeting and a friendly closing to the email. Just helps minimize escalation, any further escalation. And firm, ending the conversation cordially rather than feeding conflict. So the firm piece is really about ending the conversation clearly rather than being harsh. You still want to be friendly, you still want to be cordial and professional in the communication, but it's about ending the conversation in a productive way rather than continuing a back and forth and engaging further. And when we're talking about something like BIF communication and stakeholder management, choosing the right communication channel really matters. So this is another piece I wanted to highlight as it relates to developing, human-centered communication skills. So in the context of something like BIF and handling or de-escalating high conflict situations in your professional life, think about which mode of communication or communication channel is appropriate for the situation. Email tends to be best for, clear documentation, low emotion issues. A lot of times I see this in my coaching work that folks stay on email too long. They continue a conversation solely on email when it should be transferred to, for example, a phone call to help de-escalate the situation or avoid misunderstandings in tone, intent, or content. Chat or messaging like Slack and many other and Teams and many other workplace chat apps are great for quick kind of low stakes coordination, but nothing higher level than that really. A phone call can be great for quickly repairing the tone, quickly clarifying a misunderstanding via email, for example. It's often really nice and quick and effective to pick up the phone to handle that kind of scenario. And then video conference, can be great for complex collaboration or repairing a relationship that may be at risk due to a conflict. An in-person conversation always, of course, there's no substitute for in-person. It's really the best for high trust kind of repair or sensitive issues that may come up. And then on not only thinking about these communication channels in the context of repairing a relationship or de-escalating a high conflict interaction, but think about them in terms of how you can be proactive in your communication channels and avoiding conflict in the first place, avoiding misunderstandings in the first place. Maybe you start out with a phone call for a certain conversation topic or meeting versus a video conference versus an email. So think strategically. So now I want to transition to talk a little bit more about what does human-centered leadership look like? And of course, everything we just talked about can apply if you're in a leadership role or to leadership situations, as well as for individual contributors. So when we talk about leadership, I always like to start from sort of an organizational development and leadership development pipeline, because that's a lot of the time, my frame of reference. So we start with identifying the right time for the right people to lead, right? If you're at an organization, you're developing your leaders. Number one, we want to avoid the Peter Principle, which is when individuals are promoted until they reach a level beyond their capacity and are not successful in that role. So I see this, we all see this a lot. For example, in technical environments, I spent a lot of my career before I moved into coaching and consulting in technical environments. And I saw a lot of technical professionals get promoted to people leadership roles without, unfortunately, getting supported along the way and trained along the way in the skill set that they needed to be effective people leaders. So you want to avoid that Peter Principle. You want to prepare folks for the next step proactively and enable them to succeed as they become people leaders. In terms of leadership development, you really want to look at talent development programs, both internal and external to the organization, and make sure they are doing what I just described, right? Proactively developing your leadership pipeline, certainly executive coaching, both internal to an organization and external can be effective at that. Mentorship is critical in every organization and for every individual. Certainly, if you don't already have a mentor in your work life, make efforts to find one. Mentors really can serve as both role models, as folks who are farther along in their career, maybe at a place where you want to get to one day, and also be trusted sources of advice and information. And then external leadership training programs can really be effective as well to help bolster that leadership pipeline in an organization. And then assessing readiness to lead. How do you assess whether someone is ready to take on that kind of people leadership role? I think looking for things like, are they receiving positive feedback from others? about their leadership potential, others who are, in a position to comment accurately about their leadership potential. Is there alignment between the individual's values and the organization's mission and vision? That is critical for effective leadership, and we'll talk more about the role that values play in all this. And then looking at the internal organizational needs for new leaders and sort of making intentional succession plans. So what do we mean? What do we think of when we're talking about human-centered leadership skills? There's a framework that I like to use called the VOICE framework that stands for values, ownership, impact, clarity, and empathy. And so, as I mentioned, values critically important to leadership, and certainly I think in the AI era, even more so. So do your personal and organizational values guide your decision-making as a leader, right? Especially when it comes to difficult decisions. Falling back on our values really is a good place to be in terms of guiding your decision making. Ownership, taking ownership as a leader, and also enabling your team members to take ownership and accountability. So that shared accountability model that we are all accountable for outcomes and results. Impact, having a focus on both your team and the outcomes. So that dual focus, I think, is really important. And again, in the AI era, a people focus is actually more critical, I think, than ever before. And we'll talk more about sort of what the future may look like when we talk about supervisors and teams and leadership. Clarity, so clear communication, again, I was just talking about some examples of what that looks like. Absolutely critical. And for leaders, having clear communication around a shared vision that they can get the team around is really critical for success. And then having empathy, and that means understanding the needs of others and using that to help build trust, and ultimately building trust in a team, psychological safety in a team has been shown to improve performance. So sometimes that can seem counterintuitive, especially when leaders are grappling with the day-to-day realities and competing priorities. But really fostering trust in a team does improve performance over time. So when we talk about values-based leadership, what are some ways you can, as a leader, sort of develop your values and develop the ways that values inform your decisions and your behavior as a leader? One way is to be proactive and not wait for a crisis to define your values, right? So you can kind of put down your personal mission, vision, and values as a leader, as well as being really aligned and aware of your organization's mission, vision, and values. Cultivating curiosity about what really brings you fulfillment as a professional is really important as well. And that, again, will help you tie in and hone in on your values and how they inform your approach as a leader. Using structured activities to help articulate your core values, and doing this with your team is really, really helpful. Again, the more you can be explicit about kind of this is who we are and what we stand for, then the more impactful that tends to be. Creating opportunities to bring core values and principles to life with your team. So this can look a lot of different ways. One thing that I used to do when I was in a large organization leading a team was to have a sort of values in action award each month at our monthly staff meeting. So we would call out a member of our team who we felt like exemplified our organizational values in their behavior, their work during the past month. And that was a way to really bring our core values and principles to life as a group. And then tracking how your values guide your decisions and behaviors. I think, again, going back to, especially when you're facing a difficult decision as a leader, letting your values inform that decision-making, tracking that over time can be really helpful to identify themes and patterns and make sure that you are, in fact, letting your values inform your decision making, and also analyzing, how you're doing that, how effectively you're doing that over time. And then reevaluating your values periodically and refining them over time. Our values, just like our priorities, shift over the course of our careers and our lives. So checking in periodically with yourself and taking a step back and doing that big picture thinking can really be helpful. So as I mentioned at the top, I really want to spend a little more time on emotional intelligence, because this is a set of skills. It's not just one skill. It's really a set of skills that is a really enormous force multiplier on the individual level, in career advancement and growth, but also at a team and organizational level. And so, again, a lot of my work as a coach with individuals and teams ends up being around these skills related to developing more emotional intelligence. The data shows us that EQ accounts for about 58% of performance in all types of jobs. So if you think about that for a moment, it's tremendous influence and impact on people's effectiveness at work. So what are we talking about? What do we mean when we say emotional intelligence? As I said, it's a set of skills, and Travis Bradberry and Gene Greaves, the Emotional Intelligence 2.0 book, they really have done some of the landmark work around defining EQ. So EQ includes self-awareness, which is really about understanding your own emotions and how to lean into your strengths. EQ includes self-management, which is managing your reactions. And typically at work, that can look like, how do you manage those reactions under pressure with professionalism and poise? Social awareness is another component. So how do you understand and accurately perceive the emotions of others? So how do you read the room and respond accordingly? And then relationship management, that is really critical for things like building rapport, resolving conflict, and inspiring collaboration if you're a leader of a team, for example. So these sets of 4 primary skills account for this concept of emotional intelligence, and again, has an outsized impact on an individual's effectiveness as a leader, as a team member, and also on a team or group's collective impact. So how do you build emotional intelligence as a skill set? How do you develop EQ as a professional and as a person? I get that question a lot. So I just wanted to provide some resources and ways that you can do that. So there are plenty of assessment tools out there. I'm sure many of you are familiar with some of these, like the DISC, or having a 360-degree assessment. If you're in a leadership role at an organization, you will often receive that as part of your kind of performance review process. A lot of these different tools and types of assessments can provide, really valuable feedback that helps you gain that self-awareness, right? That self-awareness piece and as well as, depending on the assessment tool, how you come across to others, which can be very valuable feedback. Again, one-on-one coaching, working with a confidential thought partner like a coach to improve, EQ and related behaviors, how to lean into your strengths more effectively. Some organizations now, particularly larger organizations with larger HR departments, have internal coaches, which I think is great. There are many organizations that hold workshops on EQ and related topics, and as well as external leadership development programs that they offer for their employees. So look at what your organization offers there. And then peer support. Peer support can be incredibly powerful, and again, a great source of trusted feedback. And so there are leadership peer groups, there are book clubs, workplace affinity groups, again, internal to an organization and external to an organization. So I definitely recommend, particularly for early career folks or people in sort of demanding people leader roles, a peer group can be a really great sort of safe, trusted space of peers where you can develop and grow together and give each other feedback. And so another piece to leadership and human-centered leadership that I wanted to talk about that I think dovetails nicely with some of these other skills is a coaching approach to leadership. So what does that mean? Really fundamentally and sort of at a basic level, a coaching approach to leadership is about the leader as coach. So the leader as someone who asks good questions, to elicit insights from their team, someone who stays curious a bit longer in the conversation to listen to understand, not jumping right into solutioning. So what I certainly have seen in a lot of my work over the years is that a lot of leaders end up jumping into the solution phase very quickly because they're used to solving problems, right? They're very skilled, competent professionals, and they are ready to solve their team's problems. But in the long run, especially, what the data shows us, in the workplace that is often more effective is a leader who empowers their team to solve the problems on their own. And the team members are often closer to the work and are in a great position to solve problems effectively. And it leads to higher levels of engagement and ownership and accountability ultimately over time when that happens. So the coaching approach to leadership can really kind of unlock a lot of positive outcomes for a team when the leader does this well. The leader doesn't need to know all the answers. This is often a difficult transition for technical experts, as I mentioned before, who are used to having to have the answers themselves, right? But taking that step back and trusting and relying on their team to arrive at their own answers is very powerful as a leader. Asking open questions, again, not diving into solutions right away, that can empower your team to elicit their own insights and solutions. And then again, staying curious in the conversation a little longer to help uncover the root cause of an issue and enable more ownership from the team. And along with that coaching approach to leadership, I think comes the ability to create a culture of continuous feedback. So, instead of having a once a year annual review kind of event-based conversation where you're focusing on performance and providing feedback to the employees on your team and talking about, bigger picture goals for the individual, the team, career development, and so forth, really moving to a continuous development cadence where you're having ongoing regular conversations, where you're providing feedback, providing coaching, checking in on bigger picture performance and professional development on an ongoing basis, for example, in all of your one-on-one meetings, whether those are weekly, bi-weekly, etc. Using coaching to address performance issues early and constructively. So again, empowering the individual and asking good questions and uncovering issues early on and proactively. So then you're positioning the annual review as a summary of conversations that have already been held throughout the year. And it's really more about, allows you, the leader, and your direct report to focus more on things like alignment on annual goals, and a productive conversation on longer term, bigger picture topics like, where do you want to be in 5 years and how do we help you get there? And how does that positively impact our team and our outcomes as a group? And then focusing on future improvement and, again, helping employees identify and use their strengths. So there are lots of benefits to this kind of continuous feedback loop. So now I want to transition to talk a little bit more specifically about how these human-centered skills interact with AI tools and technology as a whole and technical skills, and how do we kind of leverage our human-centered skills in the age of AI as the workforce is changing so rapidly. So again, another question for you all, feel free to answer in the chat. How often do you use Gen AI tools in your work? I have found just in the last year, I would say, a very high amount of variability in this area. And I'd love to hear from you. Are you are you using Gen AI tools daily, weekly, monthly, never? And if you're using these tools, what tool do you use the most often? ChatGPT, Claude, Gemini, Copilot, something else? Love to hear from you. I'm actually really curious because, again, just in the last year, I think, amongst the folks I work with, this has changed a tremendous amount. And I know it's changed for me personally as well, in terms of the frequency of use and the tools I use. Great. And I see some answers. And sorry, I somehow missed the answers to the prior question in the chat. I'm just seeing them now. So thank you for those of you who put some human skills in there. And I see, Kelly, your question about, do you find people still open to receiving phone calls? Does technology make it harder to reach someone? That's a really good question. I would say that probably the sort of best practice these days is to text or message someone ahead of calling them. So what I think is kind of the expectation now in the current work environment would be to message you to say, hey, do you have 5 minutes for a quick phone call? Or let me know, if not now, when a good time to call is, rather than just picking up the phone and calling you out of the blue, especially if we're in a remote work environment, a fully remote, or probably I would say a hybrid work environment as well. So I would say that's kind of the best practice these days that I'm seeing. But having said that, I think people are definitely still open to receiving phone calls. Thanks for that question. So going back to Gen AI tools, I see a few times a week, occasionally multiple times a week, and then using it daily, and ChatGPT comes up as, for those of you who said which tool, the number one, and as well as an internal version, which, especially more and more organizations are developing their own kind of internal instance of a Gen AI tool. So thanks for answering that. That's actually pretty interesting to see your answers there. So there's this concept called human in the loop, which some of you are probably familiar with. What does that mean? Human in the loop is about humans providing oversight and input into AI workflows, into AI LLMs, or the data models that are the large language models that underpin what the results we get from AI. And so it's really important, as AI tools evolve, that the human is in the loop, right? That we are ensuring accuracy and reliability of both what is in the LLM that the AI tools are pulling from, and the accuracy and reliability of the outputs, right? The inputs and the outputs of these tools. It's really important, and one of the key benefits of human in the loop is to ensure ethical decision-making and accountability, right? We all have heard about hallucinations. AI can hallucinate, which basically just means it makes stuff up. And so, you really want to have that ethical and accountability oversight that the human can provide. Transparency and explainability as well. So again, knowing what the inputs are and what the AI tool is learning from and pulling from is really critical to understand the results that you get. Is it scraping from the whole internet, or is it scraping from, for example, an internal version of an AI tool at a company? Is it then scraping from, like, how have you defined what it learns from and what it scrapes from? Your emails, your intranet, your calendars, your knowledge management system like SharePoint. What are the inputs? And that helps you understand what the outputs that you're getting and the quality of those outputs. Human in the loop methods. So there's some specific methods that human in the loop can utilize to enable higher quality outputs from AI tools. So supervised learning is one of those, which really involves data scientists typically labeling data and ensuring that data is labeled correctly, and sort of data annotation. And that's helping to train those machine learning algorithms that you're probably hearing about. Reinforcement learning from human feedback, or RLHF, is another example, which actually uses sort of a reward model trained with direct human feedback, which is then used to optimize the performance of an AI tool or an AI agent. So this is really well suited for like complex tasks, or for example, there's an initiative I heard about recently where a company is using content experts, people, on their team to train an AI tool that they're developing in-house so that the tool can generate very long, very complicated reports for a huge multi-million dollar grant funded initiative, right? And then so instead of a team of humans, working hours and hours, dozens of hours on developing these incredibly long and complicated reports, the AI tool is being trained properly by a human team to then reduce the total time of work drastically. But they're doing it the right way through RLHF. And then active learning. In active learning, the model identifies uncertain or low confidence kind of predictions and requests human input only where needed. So this is a little more technical and a little more advanced, but I think this is happening more, my understanding at least, is happening more with AI machine learning types of applications. So how do we use AI effectively and responsibly? Really, it boils down a lot of this to using AI as a tool to work smarter, but not to outsource your thinking. So, and Kelly, I see your question. How can professionals position themselves to complement AI rather than compete with it? So that's a great question. I think some of the skills that I have on this slide speak to some of that. But I think the other piece is how can AI, how can we outsource or delegate these sort of routinized or more time-consuming, lower value tasks so that we as humans and professionals can focus on what we do best or what only we can do. In healthcare, talk a lot about operating at the top of your license. And I think of that concept as it relates to what you're asking here. In the best case scenarios, I think in many cases with AI, in terms of how we can use it effectively, it's allowing people to operate more at the top of their license, right? And outsourcing or delegating some of the lower value tasks. So using your judgment, is absolutely critical, right? When you're using AI tools, it will generate options. You need to decide what's appropriate and responsible from those options. Using your critical thinking, applying rigor to, like I said, the AI inputs and the outputs, questioning assumptions, verifying facts, challenging conclusions. I'll just give you one really easy, sort of simple example of that. When you're prompting a Gen AI tool like ChatGPT or Claude, some tools like Perplexity do this as a matter of like how they're built, which is great. But others, you need to prompt for this. You can prompt, if you're doing research, for example, on a topic, show me your sources. So show me your source data, source material. That's a great way to help you verify facts, right? Where are you getting these numbers from? Where are you getting these results from? When I ask you about, provide me with information about the best data visualization platform for my company. Where is that data from? Is that from a credible report, or is that something off a website of the internet that I don't trust? Ethics, again, I can't emphasize ethics enough when we're using these tools. Ensuring that AI-assisted decisions align with your organization's values and responsibilities, and also ensuring that you as an individual are using AI tools ethically as well. And then writing and editing, this is a big one that I see all the time in my work. So personally, I really like using Gen AI tools like ChatGPT and Claude as an editor much more than as a writer. So I like to, draft my own or write my own draft and then use an AI tool, and I will prompt it to edit for conciseness and clarity. AI tends to do a really nice job of things like that when you're specifically asking it for certain edits versus letting it draft the first draft itself. Then you start to really lose your voice, your tone, your knowledge, your writing skills. That I think it's a lot easier for that to be problematic. And we all know now we're starting to identify like what AI writing looks like, right? And sounds like, and it doesn't sound like humans. So just keeping that in mind, knowing when to deploy AI for writing and editing very strategically and intentionally is, I think, really important. Another case that I'll mention that comes up a lot is, with writing, for a lot of us, getting started is often the hardest part. So things like asking the AI tool to generate an outline versus the first draft will allow you to get started and get the ball rolling quickly, but still preserve your tone, your writing style, your voice, and so forth. So as we move towards newer AI technologies, I'm sure some, if not all of you, have heard of agentic AI or AI agents. So there was a recent report this year that just came out from Google Cloud on AI trends in financial services. And they're talking about how some financial services organizations are deploying AI agents for every employee from entry-level analyst to managing director level. So an AI agent, what is that? For those of you who may not know, is a sort of dynamic AI entity or tool that learns on its own and operates autonomously. So in contrast to a chatbot like ChatGPT, you can deploy an AI agent on a task or a project, and it just works like independently, or at least semi-independently, guided by you in the background or in the foreground alongside with you. And companies are starting to deploy these agents from everything from customer service to financial services to data science and many other applications. So in these scenarios, an employee, again, in this case, from this report, every employee at the organization from entry level all the way up becomes a supervisor of AI agents. So they have to learn how to delegate effectively. How do you assign those mundane, kind of repetitive tasks to AI agents? And again, that can be a good thing because it allows the human to focus on higher level tasks. Setting goals and strategy for the AI agents, so defining objectives and outlining the approach, and verifying quality. Again, super important to review the inputs and the outputs, validation, and so on and so forth. So that is a newer sort of frontier that we're starting to see play out. I like this quote from this Google executive. When working with AI, executive teams and leaders must prioritize upskilling their teams in critical thinking and applying ethical judgment in decision making. Since these skills are usually built through experience, a bank, for example, could first roll out its customer support chatbot or agent internally. Employees could then ask real questions to test and genuinely understand the customer experience and drive improvements in the application of AI. So I think she does a really nice job of summarizing a lot of what I'm talking about here and how kind of a best use case scenario of how we can interact with AI and leverage these AI tools effectively, but also responsibly, and still lean into our skill set as human beings and professionals. So I'll just end with some kind of high level trends and takeaways. I would say that, and I think the data and a lot of reports out there would support that people skills matter more than ever when it comes to things like collaboration, which is very complex in today's workforce across sometimes organizations, time zones, and cultures. Communication, as we talked about in the earlier examples with BIF framework and other types of communication scenarios that come up. Clear communication is critical for success, and leadership. We still need, really high quality people leaders in the workforce. And we need values-based leadership in the AI era now more than ever, I would say. Again, that ethics piece, that values piece is super, super important. As I talked about before, emotional intelligence is really a superpower that matters more as your career progresses. So typically, as you rise up to higher levels in your career, EQ is a higher and higher predictor of success. And professionals who are able to use AI tools effectively and responsibly are going to have a competitive advantage in this new type of workforce as we're seeing AI tools evolve. And organizations that take a people-first approach will be well-positioned for the future. And by that, I mean they're investing in their people, both in terms of upskilling them, preparing them to use, for example, these evolving AI tools and training them, but also investing in them as leaders, growing their leadership pipeline, providing those foundational people and human-centered skills that we're talking about today. Those organizations, I think, will be well positioned for the future rather than those who focus too much on tools and technology. Really taking a people-first approach, I think, is going to be sort of the long-term strategy for success moving forward. So that's all I have for today. Thank you so much for taking the time. And I'm happy to answer any other questions you have. And you can connect with me on LinkedIn or connect with me directly via email or on my website as well. And yeah, thanks for the question. So what would you say is the first piece to work on leaving today from everything you've discussed? What should I focus on first? I would say probably two things. One, so much of what I talked about today comes down to communication. So I think I just can't stress the importance of, communication skills enough. And so I would take one piece of the communication skills that I outlined, whether that really resonated with you, whether that's the tell me about yourself statement or the BIF framework. Pick one of those and sit down and write down, craft your tell me about yourself statement, or craft a BIF response to a really tough email you received, or, a BIF conversation you need to have with someone on your team, for example. So I would take one of those communication examples and frameworks that really resonates with you and is relevant to you, and I would map out an action plan, a concrete kind of follow-up step for yourself in that realm. And then the second thing I would do is start reading up more on AI tools and how to use them effectively and responsibly. And so, for myself, I can tell you what that looked like is, I had some external trainings, I went to some workshops, and it's evolving over time, but I use Gen AI tools daily now in my work, but I feel like it's really important for me to continue to always update my knowledge on, what is a high quality tool and how can I use this in a focused way where I'm not over relying on it, but I am working smarter, not harder. So figure out, and there's plenty of resources online, including many free resources that you can take to kind of skill up on using Gen AI tools, because I do think ultimately they can help you work a lot smarter, not harder.
I had a question around feedback. And
Yes.
how are people using AI to provide feedback for their employees, or how does that play into the process?
That's a good question. I mean, I've definitely worked with some clients, for example, who are using AI tools to, edit their emails. So that can include email communication of feedback, right? I think again, there you want it to be your thought partner and editor, but you don't want to outsource the tough thinking and the critical pieces of information to the AI tool, right? So the context best about the feedback scenario. So I think the more specific you can be with prompts for something like Claude or ChatGPT, the better output you tend to get. So give it the context, and that best. Give it what your goals are, what you're looking to achieve, and that will yield a better result and will yield something that looks more like a thought partner rather than just a chat bot, if that makes sense.
Very interesting. Do we have any other questions? I think I had asked a previous question around how can professionals position themselves to complement AI rather than compete with it?
Yeah. So, I think that doing your research and becoming well-versed in how AI is being used in your industry or in your field is a great starting point for that, because it varies by field. I work with a lot of biotech professionals, for example, scientists and data folks in biotech and the life sciences. In that world, AI is starting to be used for drug discovery, for example. And they're using very complex machine learning models for their research and their science. So some of those folks are learning how to use those tools alongside the wet lab tools that they've always used, right? And they're doing both. It's not an either or.
Yeah.
And some of the folks who are learning that more quickly are going to be leaders on their teams, and the team is going to start to look to that person to help them understand, okay, how do we use this new technology. So I think like researching how it's being used in your field or your industry, and you can start to position yourself as a thought leader. You know, if you get enough knowledge under your belt, and you can start to help your team, bring your team along, you know, to using the technology effectively.
Wonderful. Let's see. Any other questions? I don't think so. Leo, did you have any closing thoughts?
You know, I just would say, again, remembering that there's no substitute for the human connection. So a lot of what we talked about today, whether it's using AI or using other technologies or working in a fully remote environment, you know, or a hybrid environment, just remember there's no substitute for that human connection. That's always going to separate you as a professional. And so I would say that still remains a game changer.
Wonderful. Thank you. And I think Leo would be welcome to your thoughts. I would as well, if anybody has anything to share
Absolutely.
about how they're working with AI in their current industry and current organization. Those are always things we'd love to learn more about. Or if you have any questions, we'll be sharing these slides afterwards, so you can get in touch with Leo and talk shop, if you will. So, well, with that, I think we'll wrap up for today. Leo, thank you so much for providing such an insightful and thoughtful presentation around the integration of soft skills with technical skills. We all know that AI is rapidly transforming our workplaces right now.
Thank you so much, Kelly. Really appreciate it.
Thank you. Yeah. I'd like to give a special thanks to our series sponsor, Combined, a Chubb Benefits company, for their support and partnership. And of course, a special thanks to my colleague, Riley Legere, for helping to produce another successful virtual event. And last but certainly not least, I'd like to thank everyone again for watching and tuning in this morning. If you're interested in continuing the conversation with Leo, be sure to check your email for a follow-up message with links to additional resources that he talked about today, and a copy of the slides and a link to the recording. So with that, thank you again for attending this morning's Growth Basics for Business. And we'll see you next week, or in a couple weeks, on April 14th for our next session on paid family and medical leave that will be presented by the Maine Department of Labor. I hope you all have a wonderful day.